Have you ever heard your doorbell ring and felt your soul recoil? You're not cold. You're not antisocial. You just can't bear the cost of being someone in your own sacred space. Because if you ignore this feeling, you'll keep betraying the part of yourself that's been waiting patiently for permission to simply exist. Something deeper is happening here than just wanting to be alone. Meet Ava. She's 36, works in marketing, has good friends, a decent life. But every time someone texts, "Can I drop by?" her chest tightens, not because anyone's done anything wrong, but because the moment they walk in, something inside her disappears. The real Ava, the one who's been quietly healing, thinking, becoming, suddenly needs to hide. She puts on what I call the hosting mask. Bright smile, offering coffee, asking how they are. But inside she's screaming, "Please, I need you to leave." And then comes the guilt. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just be normal? Eva represents millions of us who've learned that home is the only place we can breathe without performing. Maybe you're not avoiding others. Maybe you're protecting something infinitely more fragile. Carl Jung would recognize what's happening to you immediately. You're living split between two fundamentally different selves, and the tension is tearing you apart from the inside. Your persona, that's Jung's term for the mask we wear in social situations. This is the version of you that greets unexpected visitors with enthusiasm you don't actually feel, makes small talk that drains your life. Force, pretends your sacred morning routine can be interrupted without spiritual consequence. This is the you that says, "Of course, come in," when your body is screaming, "No, please, not today." And then there's your shadow, the part Jung said contains everything we've learned to hide, including the parts that are actually healthy and necessary. This is the part of you that craves authentic solitude, that knows interruption isn't just inconvenience, but energetic invasion. This is the self that whispers, "I need space to think, to feel, to remember who I am, when nobody needs anything from me." This is Carl Jung shadow work in real time, not something that happens in meditation retreats or therapy offices, but in the quiet choices you make when your soul says no and your conditioning says yes. Here's what nobody talks about, what they don't teach you in school or therapy or self-help books. Every single time someone enters your space uninvited, energetically, emotionally, or physically, you hang your true self on a coat hanger behind the door and become who they need you to be. Think about this deeply for a moment. When was the last time a visitor, even someone you love, saw you completely unguarded? Hair messy, no makeup in your comfort clothes, speaking your unfiltered thoughts, feeling your actual feelings without managing how they might affect the other person. Never. Or at least, not in so long you can't remember. Because somewhere along the way, maybe in childhood, maybe through years of relationships where love felt conditional, you learned that authenticity is dangerous, that people prefer the edited version of you, that your real thoughts, your genuine moods, your need for silence might be too much, too weird, too inconvenient. Listen to this closely, because this might be the most important thing you hear today. Your need for solitude isn't selfish, it's survival. Take Jordan, 29, a software developer I've been working with. He loves his girlfriend deeply, genuinely enjoys her company, but when she's home, he notices himself constantly monitoring his internal state. Is his natural quietness seeming rude? Does his need to just sit and think make him appear depressed? Should he be more entertaining, more present, more enthusiastic about things that don't actually excite him? When I'm alone, Jordan told me in one of our sessions, I remember who I actually am. I have thoughts that aren't filtered through, how will this sound to someone else? I can be sad without having to explain why, or happy without having to share it. When someone's watching even lovingly, I become this caricature of myself. This is the split Jung called one of the fundamental wounds of modern consciousness. We've become so skilled at being who others need that we've completely forgotten who we are when nobody needs anything from us. Your home becomes a theater. Your living room transforms into a stage. Your breakfast becomes a performance of someone who has their life together. Your natural rhythms get sacrificed to accommodate another person's energy, their timing, their emotional needs. And your soul goes into hiding, waiting for everyone to leave so it can finally come out and breathe. Pause here and breathe with me for a moment. Feel your shoulders. Notice if they're carrying tension, the bone-deep exhaustion you feel after social interaction. Even pleasant social interaction isn't because you're an introvert. It's because you've been performing surgery on yourself for hours, carefully cutting away the parts that don't fit the moment, the parts that might be inconvenient or uncomfortable for the other person to witness. But here's what's really happening, what's really stealing your energy. Every time you suppress your authentic response to preserve someone else's comfort, you're choosing their reality over your own. You're voting against yourself in the election of whose truth gets to matter. The visitor who drops by isn't just entering your physical space. They're requiring you to abandon your emotional space, your mental space, your spiritual space. They're asking you to relocate yourself to make room for their presence. And if you've been doing this long enough, performing this self-abandonment so automatically that you don't even notice it happening anymore, you might have forgotten there was ever a self to abandon in the first place. Here's the revelation that will reframe your entire relationship with solitude. You're not reacting to the person at your door. You're reacting to the grave of your authentic self. Jung said, "The home is a symbol of the soul." When someone enters uninvited, energetically, emotionally, or physically, they're not just stepping into your living room. They're stepping on sacred ground that isn't ready to be opened ground, where your truest self is trying to grow. Let me show you exactly what I mean with a memory that might feel familiar. Remember being a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, playing alone in your room. You're completely absorbed in your inner world, building with blocks, drawing, talking to your toys, lost in imagination. You're utterly yourself, unafraid, unedited. Then suddenly, without warning, a parent or sibling walks in. What happens to that original self? It vanishes instantly. You immediately shift into appropriate child mode. Your natural expression changes. Your posture adjusts. Your voice takes on a different tone. The self that was just here, so present and alive, disappears as if it never existed. That original self, the one lost in imagination, unafraid of judgment, perfectly content in its own company. Where did it go? It learned to hide. Because love felt conditional on being appropriate, on being what others expected, on being convenient. Now, decades later, when someone unexpectedly enters your adult sanctuary, that same ancient self recoils. Not because the visitor is threatening, but because your soul recognizes the pattern. Here we go again. Time to disappear so someone else can be comfortable. This is where it gets profound, where everything starts to make sense. The discomfort you feel when your doorbell rings isn't about the other person at all. It's about the unhealed part of yourself that their presence accidentally activates. Their arrival triggers every cellular memory of having to be smaller, quieter, more convenient, less authentic. Maya, a 34-year-old therapist, discovered this truth during what she calls her breakdown breakthrough. She realized she wasn't actually afraid of her sister visiting. She was terrified of becoming the responsible one again. That version of herself that never gets to fall apart, never gets to be messy, never gets to just need something from someone else. When Maya's sister would call to check in, Maya would automatically switch into caretaking mode. How are you? How's work? How's your relationship? Tell me about your problems so I can offer solutions and feel useful. By the end of every conversation, Maya felt like she'd been drained by a vampire, not because she didn't love her sister, but because she'd abandoned herself completely to make room for someone else's reality. I realized, Maya told me, that I didn't have relationships. I had performances, and I was so good at performing that I'd forgotten there was anyone underneath to perform. The shocking truth that no one prepares you for your solitude isn't about avoiding people. It's about finally having permission to exist without a script. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can you become who you truly are if you're constantly becoming who others need you to be? In solitude, you don't have to manage anyone's emotions but your own. You don't have to monitor your facial expressions, moderate your energy level, or translate your thoughts into language that won't disturb someone else's peace. You don't have to be on. You can just exist. This is why interruption feels like violence, because it is violence against the self that's trying to emerge from years of hiding. Here's the question that will either terrify or liberate you. Who are you when no one needs anything from you? If you can't answer that immediately, if you draw a blank, if you feel a wave of panic at the very question, then you've been living in exile from yourself for so long that you don't remember your own face. Most people spend their entire lives in constant reaction to others' expectations, others' moods, others' needs. They never meet their actual self. They never have a conversation with their own soul. They die having been a supporting character in their own story, never knowing who they might have been if they'd been brave enough to disappoint people. But you're different. The fact that solitude calls to you, that you feel drawn to silence and space, means your authentic self is still alive. It's still fighting to be known. It's still sending up signals from wherever you've buried it saying, "I'm still here. I'm still worth knowing. Please don't forget about me." The guilt you feel about wanting to be alone, that's not your voice speaking. That's the voice of a culture that has taught you that your value lies entirely in your availability to others, your usefulness, your willingness to sacrifice your inner world for someone else's comfort. Jung called this participation mystique, the unconscious assumption that your well-being depends on maintaining others' emotional equilibrium, even at the expense of your own soul's needs. This is where you break the spell. Your need for sacred solitude is not a character flaw. It's not something to overcome or fix or be ashamed of. It's a spiritual requirement as necessary as food or water or air. The part of you that craves space, that needs silence, that feels invaded when your sanctuary is disturbed, that's not your damaged self. That's your wisest self trying to protect something precious that you've almost lost. The healing journey begins not with an invitation, but with a refusal. Not with opening up, but with the revolutionary act of closing the door. Eva learned this the hard way after months of feeling energetically drained by unexpected visits, impromptu phone calls, and well-meaning friends who thought dropping by unannounced was spontaneous and fun. One Saturday morning, After a particularly difficult week at work, Ava was sitting in her kitchen in her pajamas, drinking coffee, in blessed silence when her phone buzzed. "Hey, I'm in your neighborhood. Can I come up?" For the first time in her adult life, Eva typed back, "I can't have you over right now. I'm in a delicate space and need to stay quiet today." The guilt was immediate and crushing. Her friend's confusion was palpable even through text. But something else happened too. Relief flooded through Eva's body like she'd just exhaled after holding her breath for years. For the first time in decades, Ava chose her inner reality over someone else's expectations. She chose her soul's needs over social convention. She chose herself. Carl Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." But what if the most important thing you need to communicate is silence? What if your soul's deepest need is to not have to communicate at all? To not have to translate your inner world into language someone else can understand? This is the paradox of authentic solitude. It's not about rejecting connection. It's about finally connecting with the part of yourself that's been waiting patiently for your attention. When you say no to a conversation you don't want to have, you're saying yes to the conversation your soul has been desperate to have with you. When you refuse to perform happiness, you don't feel you create space for your authentic emotions to surface and be witnessed, maybe for the first time in years. Let me tell you about Marcus, a 31-year-old high school teacher who thought he was fundamentally broken because he preferred his own company to parties, group dinners, or weekend gatherings. He'd accepted every social invitation out of obligation, then spend the entire event counting minutes until he could escape. He'd drive home feeling like he'd been acting in a play where he didn't know his lines. "I thought something was wrong with me," Marcus explains. "Everyone else seemed energized by groups, by constant interaction. I felt like I was drowning in other people's energy, like I couldn't think my own thoughts when there were too many voices in the room." The turning point came when Marcus gave himself permission to be selective. Not antisocial, selective, strategic, intentional about where he invested his finite emotional resources. He started asking himself a simple but revolutionary question: does this interaction feed my soul or drain it? Let that question land. Does this interaction feed your soul or drain it? Revolutionary thought. You don't owe everyone access to your energy. You don't owe anyone your presence just because they want it. You don't have to justify your need for space or prove that you're not angry or explain that you're not rejecting them personally. Your solitude isn't selfish. It's sacred maintenance. It's tending to the part of yourself that makes all your other relationships possible. Think of it this way: if you don't protect your inner sanctuary, who will? The world is full of people who will gladly consume your presence, your attention, your emotional labor. But only you can guard the space where your authentic self lives and breathes and grows. Jung spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself, including the parts that don't fit social expectations, the parts that need space and silence and solitude to flourish. And here's the truth. The Carl Jung shadow is not just the dark traits you disown. It's also your sacred silence, your longing for freedom, your right to be invisible for a while without guilt. But individuation requires space. Sacred, uninterrupted, unapologetic space. It requires saying no to good things, so you can say yes to essential things. Here's your permission slip written in your own blood. You are allowed to close the door. You are allowed to not answer the phone. You are allowed to say, "I'm not available right now." without providing a detailed explanation that makes everyone feel better about your boundary. Your solitude is not a luxury you indulge when everything else is taken care of. It's a necessity as fundamental as sleep or food or medical care. The people who truly love you, not the idea of you, not what you do for them, but the actual person you are underneath all the performing, they will understand. They'll respect your need for space because they want you to thrive, not just survive. The people who don't understand, who take your boundaries personally, who make you feel guilty for having needs, well, maybe they love the character you've been playing, not the person you actually are. Something beautiful and unexpected happens when you finally start protecting your solitude. You remember who you are when nobody's watching. You rediscover the person you were before you learned to disappear. Eva began creating what she calls soul rituals. Small, non-negotiable practices that belonged only to her. Coffee in complete silence, no phone, no music, just her thoughts slowly surfacing like fish in a still pond. Writing in her journal without censoring, letting her real feelings spill onto paper, without worrying if they made sense or sounded right. Sitting by her window for 20 minutes watching the world wake up without having to explain to anyone why she wasn't being productive. These weren't selfish acts. They were acts of profound self-respect, revolutionary acts of remembering that she existed independently of other people's needs or opinions. Your solitude becomes sacred when you realize it's not empty space. It's full space, full of your unspoken thoughts, your unperformed feelings, your unedited self. Full of the dreams you stopped dreaming because they seemed impractical, the emotions you stopped feeling because they seemed inconvenient, the questions you stopped asking because they made other people uncomfortable. In solitude, you don't have to turn on the lights if you don't want to. You don't have to explain your moods or defend your need for quiet or justify why you're not ready to talk about what happened yesterday. You don't have to make sense to anyone but yourself. This is where healing happens, not in the chaos of constant interaction, but in the quiet spaces between words, between expectations, between performances, in the space where you can finally hear your own voice again. Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." But you can only look inside when there's actually space to see, when you're not constantly managing other people's emotions or meeting their expectations or performing the version of yourself they're most comfortable with. Loneliness stops being a void and becomes a sanctuary. Solitude stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like coming home. Jordan discovered this when he finally had the courage to tell his girlfriend, "I need 2 hours every morning that belong just to me. Not because I don't love you, not because I'm pulling away, but because I need to remember who I am, so I can love you from a full place, not an empty one." Instead of being offended, she was relieved. "I thought you were getting tired of me," she said. "I didn't realize you were trying to come back to yourself so you could show up more fully in our relationship." Your solitude is not withdrawal from love. It's preparation for authentic love. It's the space where you remember who you are, so you can share yourself from abundance instead of performing yourself from depletion. When you know who you are alone, when you've spent time with your unedited thoughts and unperformed feelings, you can enter relationships as a whole person instead of a collection of reactions to other people's expectations. You begin to see your home not as an escape from the world, but as the place where you remember your true name, the place where you don't have to prove anything or earn anything or be anything other than exactly who you are in this moment. The self you meet in solitude may be confused, may be sad, may be angry, may be peaceful, definitely imperfect. That's not your bad self that needs to be hidden. That's your honest self. And your honest self deserves love and attention, and respect too. You start to understand that the part of you that needs space isn't damaged or antisocial or cold. It's the part that's been trying to protect your authenticity in a world that rewards performance over presence. You don't need to let everyone in, not when your soul is still under reconstruction. You have the right to open the door only when you feel safe enough to stay true to yourself. The sacred boundary isn't built from fear. It's built from love. Love for the part of you that's been waiting patiently to be known, to be honored, to be given space to exist without apology. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But acceptance requires space, and space requires boundaries. This is the essence of Carl Jung's shadow work, learning to welcome the parts of yourself that were once silenced, to maintain connection, and giving them the dignity of space, even if it means standing alone for a while. Your solitude is not loneliness. It's homecoming. If someone truly loves you, they'll understand your need for sacred space. If they don't understand, maybe they love the character you performed, not the soul you actually are. Give yourself permission to close the door, draw the curtains, turn off your phone, and remember who you are when nobody needs anything from you. You're not cold. You're not broken. You're not antisocial. You're sacred, and sacred things need protected space to grow. If you've ever felt guilty for not wanting visitors, for needing space, for choosing solitude over social obligation, leave A in the comments. You're not weird. You're not broken. You're just protecting the place where your soul resides. Welcome home to yourself.